Their encounters so profound, they crack open the soul. Moments that arrive like echoes from another lifetime, striking you with the quiet certainty that this meeting was written long before you learned the meaning of destiny. The empath walks into the world carrying light, a quiet luminosity, a softness that sees beneath surfaces. The narcissist moves through life wrapped in shadow, a darkness formed from the parts of themselves they have long refused to touch. At first, everything resembles a destined love song. The empath believes they've met a soulmate, someone sent to heal, to grow, to evolve together. Meanwhile, the narcissist believes they've found the perfect mirror, a place where their image is adored, reflected, and exalted as the center of a private universe. Both are right, but for completely opposite reasons. Behind the attraction, the passion, the chaos, lies a soul contract, an agreement made long before the two stepped into this lifetime. But if that contract shatters, if the shadow flees the light, the real question is no longer, why did they leave? The question becomes, who is the universe asking you to become now that they are gone? To understand why the meeting between an empath and a narcissist feels destined, we must first understand the realms they each carry within. The empath walks through life with a luminous awareness, a sensitivity that perceives beyond words, a light tuned to the frequency of emotion, intuition, and subtle truth. Their heart is an open field, a quiet sanctuary where others feel seen without asking, held without needing to explain. The narcissist moves with an entirely different consciousness, one shaped by shadow, fragmentation, and unintegrated wounds. Their inner world is a labyrinth of abandoned feelings, a place where the self has been exiled and the ego rules like a trembling king, desperate for reflection, terrified of exposure. When these two beings meet, the encounter feels strangely familiar, a déjà vu that settles deep in the chest, a recognition that bypasses logic and speaks directly to the soul. It feels as if we've known each other for lifetimes, as if this moment is not happening for the first time, but repeating itself across dimensions of memory you can't quite name. Jung would say that what we call destiny is often the psyche recognizing itself in another. Attraction is not random. It is projection pointing us toward the unclaimed parts of our own inner world. The empath sees in the narcissist the shadow they have long refused to acknowledge, the wounds they have tried to heal in others instead of facing within themselves. The narcissist sees in the empath the light they have never been able to cultivate, the warmth, the depth, the emotional fluency that their ego has spent a lifetime hiding from. This mutual recognition, this silent exchange of archetypes, creates the illusion of fate. Not because the universe is cruel, but because the unconscious is purposeful. It draws us toward those who can awaken the parts of us still sleeping beneath the surface. This is why the first meeting feels orchestrated, as if an unseen hand arranged every detail. The timing, the chemistry, the uncanny sense that you were meant to cross paths. Because on a deeper level, you were. A soul contract is never random. It is the psyche's way of guiding you toward the exact encounter that will force your light and your shadow into the same room. And that meeting, inevitable, magnetic, ancient, is what we often mistake for destiny. Thus begins the merging, the soft, invisible blending of energies that feels spiritual, fated, almost mystical. Boundaries fade like mist under sunlight. The empath absorbs the narcissist's pain and mistakes it for intimacy. The narcissist absorbs the empath's light and mistakes it for genuine connection. On an energetic level, it is as if the narcissist is starving in a spiritual desert, and the empath arrives like dawn, warm, golden, overflowing. They drink your light the way a starving soul drinks dawn, not out of malice, but out of a desperate hunger for something they have never learned to generate from within. In these early stages, the contract feels heavenly. The empath feels needed. The narcissist feels alive. Two broken maps suddenly look like they fit together. But beneath the surface, something else is unfolding. The narcissist begins to rely on that mirror as the primary source of their emotional oxygen. Your admiration becomes their validation. Your intuition becomes their compass. Your compassion becomes the bandage covering wounds they refuse to acknowledge. Meanwhile, the empath, blinded by the beauty of giving, fails to notice the subtle erosion of their own center. They shrink themselves to fit the narcissist's needs, dim their intuition to avoid conflict, and stretch their boundaries until they resemble a ghost of who they once were. This is not love. It is energetic merging, a blending so complete that the empath begins breathing for two, while the narcissist forgets how to breathe on their own. And yet, this dynamic is not an accident. It is the role assigned in the contract. The narcissist arrives to consume the light until the empath finally realizes that their light was never meant to be a source for someone else's survival. That moment of recognition, of rupture, is what the contract was structured to create. Every soul contract ends in one of three ways. Not with a loud explosion, not always with a dramatic confession, but with a quiet unraveling of energy that the heart feels long before the mind can name it. For the empath, the breaking of the contract often begins in silence. A sudden cooling, a message left unread, a presence that once felt warm now feels distant, as if the person standing in front of you has slipped behind an invisible wall. Their silence is not passive. It is a weapon forged from avoidance, a retreat into the shadow where they no longer have to face the reflection you once held up. Then comes betrayal. Not always physical, but emotional, spiritual, energetic. They abandon the connection you nurtured, seeking validation in new mirrors, stepping into another stage on another stage, hoping a different face will offer the same illusion of wholeness your light once provided. The betrayal burns not because they loved someone else, but because they fled from the awakening the bond required of them. And finally, denial, the most brutal form of rupture. They rewrite the story. They twist the timeline. They deny the intimacy, the depth, the synchronicity that intertwined your souls. What was sacred to you becomes disposable to them. What felt divine becomes never happened. Your heart remembers. Their ego erases. But when the soul contract breaks, what collapses is far greater than a relationship. It is a spiritual earthquake, a trembling at the foundations of your inner world. The shock wave ripples through your psyche, rearranging memories, restructuring identity, shattering illusions you didn't know you were still clinging to. The rupture does not occur in words. It doesn't happen during the final argument, or the last message, or the moment the door closes behind them. It happens in the energetic field, in that silent, invisible space between two souls that once vibrated in resonance and now fall out of rhythm like two planets drifting apart. It is a break you feel in your chest, in your breath, in the way your body suddenly forgets how to trust its own light. A tearing not of muscle, but of meaning. Not of the heart, but of the unseen cord that bound you. A cord woven through shared dreams, sacred projections, and the unconscious promises made before memory began. A silent cord snapping in the dark. That is how a soul contract ends. Not with noise, but with an absence so deep it echoes. When the soul contract breaks, The empath does not simply move on. They descend. Not into madness, not into weakness, but into the ancient terrain Jungians call the descent of the self. A collapse of the old psychic structure so the true self can begin to emerge. This collapse unfolds in 3 stages, each more mysterious and disorienting than the last. Stage 1. Distortion of time. Entering the soul plane. It begins subtly. Time no longer behaves the way it once did. You wake from dreams that feel older than your body, as if you walked through memories that were not yours. Oceans stretching under black spirals. Corridors lined with mirrors reflecting faces you've never seen. Rooms filled with symbols you somehow understand even without language. You feel yourself slipping between worlds. In one world, the physical, you eat, you work, you speak. But in the other, the soul plane, everything is louder, clearer, more real than reality itself. It is the place where the unconscious begins its work. Jung wrote that when the conscious mind can no longer carry the weight, the unconscious steps forward to complete the task of transformation. And this is exactly what begins happening within you. Memories blur. Premonitions sharpen. Linear time dissolves into a looping dream, and past, present, and possibility blend like watercolor bleeding across the page. You may think you're losing your grip, but in truth, your soul is widening its field, stretching you beyond the narrow timeline your mind once clung to. This is the first sign that the old self is beginning to crumble. Stage 2. Emotional chaos. The residual energy of the narcissist. Then comes the storm. Your emotions stop belonging to one moment, one interpretation, one narrative. They surge and recede like tides moved by an unseen moon. Love crashes into rage. Rage collapses into guilt. Guilt dissolves into numbness. A heaviness that sits on the chest like a winter that refuses to thaw. You may think, what is wrong with me? Why am I feeling everything and nothing at once? But the truth is far stranger and far more spiritual. You are not just feeling your emotions, you are feeling theirs. When the contract breaks, fragments of the narcissist's energy remain lodged in the empath's field. Residual impressions, psychic echoes, pieces of their unprocessed fear, shame, and longing still clinging to your aura because they were never willing to hold those feelings themselves. Empaths are energetic sponges, not by choice, but by design. Your nervous system is wired to perceive what others refuse to feel. So the emotional chaos inside you is not a malfunction. It is a detox, a purging, a release of energy that was never yours to carry. This is why your sadness feels ancient, your anger feels foreign, your longing feels haunted. You are expelling a soul residue that does not belong to you. And yet, this stage must happen. The psyche cannot build a new center while carrying the remnants of someone else's shadow. Stage 3. The negrido phase. The alchemy of dissolution. And then you enter the darkest room of all, the negrido, the black phase of the soul. Alchemy teaches that nothing new can be created until the old form has dissolved. Jung saw this as the psychological process where identity collapses so a deeper, truer self can emerge from the ashes. In the negrido, everything seems to fall away. Your motivation evaporates. Your passions dim. Your relationships feel distant. The world loses its color, as if someone turned down the saturation of life itself. You withdraw, not out of avoidance, but out of instinct. Your soul is contracting, pulling energy inward to prepare for the metamorphosis that cannot occur in the light. Isolation becomes sacred. Stillness becomes necessary. The silence around you is not emptiness. It is incubation. You may feel lost, but what is truly happening is that the ego, the version of you built on pleasing, fixing, giving, absorbing, is dissolving, melting into the primordial dark so that the self, the true and sovereign you, can begin forming. The negrido is not punishment. It is preparation. The chrysalis before the wings, the winter before the bloom. It is the sacred dismantling of everything you thought you were so that everything you truly are can finally take shape. This is the empath's spiritual collapse. Not a breaking, but a dark rebirth. A descent that every awakened soul must one day walk through. For only after the darkness does the new light begin to speak. Even after the contract breaks, after the silence settles, after the physical connection dissolves, there is a haunting that lingers. Subtle, spectral, impossible to explain with ordinary language. You still feel them. Not in memory, but in the energetic field, like a faint pulse beneath the floorboards of your soul. You hear their emotion before you hear their voice. You sense their sorrow before they ever confess it. Their presence moves through your dreams like a shadow made of breath, appearing in symbols, in echoes, in half-formed visions that feel older than the life you're living now. Some nights, you dream of them standing in a dim corridor, eyes filled with unspoken fear. Other times you see oceans swallowing the horizon, mirrors cracking without sound, rooms drenched in the blue light of memory. Then, during the day, synchronicities appear. Their birthday on a receipt, their name in a song you haven't heard in years, a stranger wearing their expression for a split second before the illusion collapses. This phenomenon has a name. In Jungian terms, it is soul residue, the energetic imprint of a bond that once operated in the deepest layers of the unconscious. It is a psychic echo, a reverberation of their unresolved shadow still vibrating through the cord that once bound you. Energetic connections do not end when the relationship ends. They end when both souls have completed the lesson encoded within the contract. And the narcissist, unwilling to face their shadow, leaves fragments of themselves inside your field. Fear they never processed, longing they never admitted, shame they never confronted. You feel these fragments as if they're your own. This is why your sadness spikes for no reason, why your chest tightens out of nowhere, why songs, numbers, and faces seem to follow you like ripples of an invisible tide. But here is the danger, the spiritual trap that captures countless empaths. You mistake this spectral perception for a message from the universe. You think, maybe we're meant to reunite. Maybe this is a sign to go back. Maybe their soul still needs me. No, these sensations do not mean return. They mean release. What you are feeling is not destiny pulling you together, but the contract dissolving, the final waves of energy leaving your system. If you respond to these echoes, if you chase them, if you try to rescue the shadow you once loved, you fall into the oldest karmic loop of all, the saving instinct, the belief that you must bring them back to the light. This loop is endless. It binds you to pain. It resurrects the contract again and again until you are pouring yourself into a soul that refuses to awaken. Spectral perception is not a calling. It is a cleansing. A final goodbye whispered not by their ego, but by the residue of their unhealed self finally leaving your field. Your task is not to return. Your task is to witness, to breathe, to allow the echo to fade until silence becomes your freedom. But the narcissist begins a different journey. A descent not into transformation, but into the collapse of the very illusions that once held their world together. It happens in 4 phases. Phase 1, the escape phase, the illusion of victory. At first, it looks like they've won. They move on quickly, rushing into the arms of someone new, posting curated happiness, laughing too loudly in public places as if joy could be summoned by performance. This is not healing. It is ego compensation, a frantic attempt to outrun the void inside. What you see is not real love, but a performance of stability, a mask crafted to prove, both to the world and themselves, that they were right to leave. The narcissist cannot sit in silence. Silence reveals too much. So they fill their life with noise, new faces, new fantasies, new mirrors, hoping one of them will reflect the same light your soul once gave freely. But the universe does not bend for illusions, and soon the mask begins to crack. Phase 2, the collapse of the reflective ego. All narcissists survive through mirrors, reflections of admiration, desire, adoration. Your light was their brightest mirror, the clearest surface through which they could momentarily believe they were whole. But when the empath finally withdraws, the narcissist loses access to the only reflection that ever felt real. This is the beginning of collapse. Without your energy, their ego becomes unanchored, a structure with no supporting beams. Restlessness creeps in first, then insomnia, then that sinking inner chill that comes when the soul realizes it has been abandoned by its own illusions. Irritability rises. Paranoia whispers. Their identity begins to blur at the edges because they were never rooted in themselves, only in the reflection you once provided. The mirror is gone, and without a mirror, a narcissist cannot find themselves. Phase 3, psychic disintegration. The shadow returns. With no one left to absorb their chaos, their mind turns inward, the place they fear most. And then the looping begins. They replay old conversations, twist memories to justify their actions, reshape the past to protect their ego from the truth pressing against its walls. This is psychic disintegration, the slow fracturing of a self built entirely on avoidance. When there is no one left to blame, their shadow, the exiled part of them they have fled from for a lifetime, returns with quiet, merciless persistence. Shame surfaces in the hours after midnight. Fear leaks through the cracks during long, silent mornings. Regret, though unspoken, breathes heavily in the background of their psyche. This is the stage they never show. The collapse no one sees. The unraveling they wage war against in the privacy of their own mind. Phase 4, karmic mirroring. Distortion returns as truth. And then, inevitably, the final phase arrives. The universe mirrors back everything they once projected outward. Friends drift away without obvious reason. New partners withdraw, unable to sustain the emotional void. Secrets that were once buried find their way into the light. Opportunities crumble just when they need them most. This is karmic mirroring, not punishment, but the natural balancing of energies. What they sowed in distortion returns to them in truth. Every manipulation, every lie, every betrayal circles back, not through vengeance, but through resonance. They are confronted not with what they did to you, but with what they refuse to face within themselves. And it is here, in the vacuum of lost mirrors, in the weight of their unclaimed shadow, that the narcissist finally encounters the collapse they spent a lifetime avoiding. What if the greatest shift comes from realizing they never truly broke the soul contract? They simply completed their role. From the beginning, their presence was never meant to be permanent. They were a catalyst, a spark struck against the flint of your spirit, a necessary disturbance that shook loose every illusion, every wound, every forgotten fragment you needed to reclaim. Their role was not to love you in the way your heart dreamed, but to awaken you in the way your soul required. To expose where you overgave, where you abandoned yourself, where your boundaries dissolved into mist. They came carrying shadow so your light could finally learn its own strength instead of shining only for others. And your role? Your role was to remember yourself, to learn sovereignty, not the cold independence that rejects connection, but the sacred knowing that your worth does not hinge on being chosen. To learn boundaries, not as walls, but as the quiet architecture of self-respect. To learn love, not the kind that empties you, but the kind that does not require you to bleed in order to be seen. From a Jungian perspective, this is the essence of individuation, the uniting of ego and soul, the moment the fragmented inner world begins weaving itself into wholeness. And so the contract wasn't broken. It was fulfilled. They delivered the lesson. You answered the call. And now the path diverges, not in bitterness, not in longing, but in quiet completion. Because the purpose of their presence was never to stay. It was to return you to yourself. And that sacred remembering, is the real end of the story. In the quiet that follows the collapse, when the echoes of their absence finally soften, a strange clarity begins to rise. You realize you did not lose anyone. You did not fail. You did not fall short of destiny. What you lost was an illusion. What you found was yourself. The soul contract dissolves not with thunder, but like morning mist lifting from the surface of a lake, subtle, silent, inevitable. One day it is simply gone, and the space it once occupied is filled with your own breath, your own presence, your own returning. This is the moment the soul recognizes its freedom. Not the freedom of forgetting, but the freedom of understanding. The freedom of seeing the past not as a wound, but as a passage. Your light no longer bends toward their shadow. Your energy no longer stretches to hold what refuses to be held. Your heart no longer mistakes pain for prophecy. You come home to yourself, the self you abandoned, the self you dimmed, the self you sacrificed piece by piece to keep a broken contract alive. And in that homecoming, everything shifts. You feel spacious, centered, unshakable, whole. Because some souls come into your life to love you, some come to break you, and some, the rarest, the most transformative, come only to return you to the self you were born to become. If this journey spoke to something deep inside you, if it illuminated a truth you have long felt but never named, then share your story below. Your voice may become the light that guides another soul out of their own shadow.